United States Senator Tom Cotton to the Doc Washburn Show on 101.1 The Answer. Senator Cotton, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, Doc. I hope you're doing well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I am. And, of course, when your office reached out to me, definitely want to talk about Venezuela. And in the meantime, this insanity in Minneapolis happened. And I know you don't like to admit it, but you actually do have a law degree. So we can ask you legal questions, even though I think the first time you were ever on my show at the other station, I said, oh, by the way, not only is he a combat veteran of our military, served in with honor over there in Iraq and Afghanistan, but he's also a lawyer. And the first thing you said was, no, Doc, I've been clean now for 10 years.
I've been clean now, Doc, for over 20. So there you go.
Yes. However, you're familiar with the law, and most people in the sound of our voices today have seen the video from one or perhaps several angles, and the ICE agent shot at the woman who, as soon as she hit him with the SUV. But here's my concern. You have people like Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and even earlier, a few days earlier, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson saying, well, federal agents are just out there shooting Americans down in the street. Is there some kind of federal statute that perhaps our attorney general could look into using for people in elective office who are trying to incite violence? Because that's what's going on.
Yeah, Doc, people like Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, and Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, have been deeply irresponsible. I mean, it goes back to Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, earlier last year.
Yeah.
Trying to interfere with the lawful activities of immigration officers. I get it that they want an open border. They want to flood our country with illegal aliens. Mm-hmm. And they're fine to complain about it. They're fine to protest about it. They're fine to campaign against President Trump and Republicans about it. But what they shouldn't do is encourage citizens to go out and interfere with law enforcement. You should never do that, right? No matter what you think about the policies that law enforcement, be it the local police or state troopers or ICE authorities, are carrying out. I'll just tell you the way I experienced it this afternoon, Doc. I was sitting in the Intelligence Committee chairing a classified hearing. It's one of the few times I ever watched CNN because it's on the screen of the Democrat who sits next to me, so I can't avoid it.
Yeah.
And they were showing videos from a certain angle and claiming that it was clearly an unjustified shooting. Only after I got out of that classified space and got back to the office and talked to my aides, did I see the other video that's since been released that makes it perfectly clear. This woman was driving her vehicle right at an ICE officer. They were trying to stop her. They were trying to get her out of her vehicle. I think she's one of these professional agitators who just follows ICE officers around, trying to interfere with them and alert illegal aliens of their presence. And she was driving right at him and would have driven right over him and killed him probably if he hadn't taken justified self-defense. Now, we should always wait to make sure we get all the facts, but just looking at that most recent video, it sure does seem like that to me, Doc. And no matter what you think the facts are, it is never appropriate to interfere with law enforcement during their activities. You shouldn't resist arrest. There's plenty of ways to register your displeasure in our country with what law enforcement is doing. Interfering with their activities is not an appropriate one, and it's not a safe one.
Yeah, no question about it. But now Governor Tim Walz is suggesting that he might mobilize the National Guard to interfere with ICE. So I would hope that, President Trump will go ahead and nationalize the Minnesota National Guard, just like President Eisenhower had to do in Arkansas all those years ago to open up Central High to black kids. And I'm hoping that, again, if the governor does try to do that, I mean, I don't see how that's not insurrection and sedition. I think he's asking to be indicted.
Doc, what he should do with his National Guard, if necessary, is to mobilize them to maintain stability and order on the streets of Minnesota. I've seen some reports that there's now been rioting or damaging to public property, just like you saw after the George Floyd incident in 2020. What the governor of Minnesota should do is to protect innocent lives and property in his own state. And if he were to mobilize the National Guard to help not to do that, but to interfere with lawful federal authorities, then yes, of course, Donald Trump should immediately federalize the National Guard, as you say, just like Dwight Eisenhower had to do when another Democratic governor, this time in our state in 1957, used them to try to interfere with lawful federal authority.
Right. Exactly. And while we're at it, since you mentioned earlier in the interview that the only time you see CNN is when you are chairing the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and the Democrat next to you is watching CNN, so you can't avoid it. My guess would be that would be the ranking member, the vice chairman, Mark Warner of Virginia. And I think that you should do something about that. I mean, I guess it'd be inappropriate to say combat pay, but there's got to be some kind of remittance for having to put up with this.
Well, fortunately, I've got Jim Risch of Idaho to my left, so I can check out Fox News there. And then in front of me, I just keep the MLB network on. So I can follow the hot stove.
There you go. The MLB network. I love it. Well, look, when your office first contacted me, you definitely want to talk about Venezuela. And again, the liberals seem to be ignoring the fact that with Maduro, we're talking about a guy who's under federal indictment, ignoring the fact of how spectacular the operation was, and that not one American life was lost. And the guy and his wife were literally read their rights before they were put on the helicopter to get back to our ship. Is it just intentional obfuscation for them to just try? Is everything, well, it's an election year, so we got to try to figure out a way to make Trump look bad?
Yeah, Doc. It's actually worse than what you put it. They're not ignoring how bad Maduro was. You've probably seen the videos, from 5 or 6 years ago when Chuck Schumer criticizes President Trump's Venezuela policy in his first term, or other Democratic senators like Chris Murphy. But they're still doing that today. If you go listen to what most Democrats have said since Saturday morning, they concede in their statements that Maduro is a drug trafficking, illegitimate communist dictator. But then they concede that it's a better thing for the world that he's out of power. But then they condemn Donald Trump for removing him from power. They want to eat their cake and have it too.
Yeah.
And you can't have it both ways. Look, Arkansans are safer tonight, and our country is safer tonight because we no longer have Nicolas Maduro in power in Venezuela. It wasn't just that he was trafficking drugs and killed hundreds of Arkansans and thousands of Americans. And that, again, that's not Doc Washburn or Tom Cotton saying that, not Donald Trump or not even Joe Biden. That's a grand jury of our fellow citizens who concluded that more than once, by the way. But he had turned Venezuela into a crossroads and a playground for every American enemy around the world. Russia, China, Cuba, Iran, even Islamic terrorists like Hezbollah.
Yeah.
So we are much safer tonight than we were with Maduro in power. Now, there's much to be done. President Trump, I think, has made the right decision that under the circumstances, it's best to try to work with the interim authorities in Venezuela. These are not Jeffersonian Democrats. They were in league with Maduro until Saturday morning, but they are more compliant than Maduro ever was. Yeah. And they recognize the immense leverage that we have over Venezuela, most notably the cash crisis they face. They cannot get revenue from their black market oil exports because we have put a quarantine on it. They will not, their society and government will begin to break down in a number of days if they don't get that revenue.
Right.
They will not be able to pay police officers or firefighters or sanitation workers or turn on the electricity. And that's why they've agreed to turn over 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the United States, which we will then sell on the open market, not at the discount rates that Venezuela sells it to countries like Cuba or China. And it will benefit not Maduro's cronies, but the Venezuelan people.
Yeah.
That's the short term. In the medium term, we want to see them continue to meet our demands, kick out the Cubans, kick out the Iranian intelligence officers, kick out Hezbollah, let political exiles return. So in the long term, Venezuelans can once again have a say on how they're governed. Because remember, Venezuela used to be a stable, prosperous, pro-American country.
Oh, yeah.
It has been for the last 20 years the most dangerous anti-American country in our backyard. We want it to be, once again, stable, prosperous, and pro-American.
So if I understand correctly, because the last election they had, this opposition leader who's definitely Jeffersonian and wanted to return the constitutional freedoms of Venezuela, Machado. If we play this right, then the Venezuelans would have enough freedom to go ahead and choose their own leader, because the concern, of course, I have, a lot of people have, I think, is that Maduro's henchmen are still there. But maybe, if I understand what you're saying correctly, we have the economic leverage to maybe mitigate that in some way.
Right. Yeah. Right now, we have all the leverage. Again, the Venezuelan government and really Venezuelan society will begin to simply disintegrate in a matter of days, maybe a couple, 3 weeks, if they don't gain access to the black market oil export revenue that the regime has used for so long.
Right.
That's why Delcy Rodriguez, again, no saint, the vice president, who is now the interim authority in Venezuela, has agreed with President Trump to provide 30 to 50 million barrels of oil because they desperately need that revenue.
Yeah.
But we'll be in charge of the bank account. We'll put them on allowance. We'll allow them the money they need to pay police officers, to pay firefighters, to pay sanitation workers, to keep the lights on,
Right.
to make sure the hospitals are operating. And then we expect them to take a lot of other steps as well, again, because of the leverage that we have. And we're going to gain even more leverage. Just today, for instance, President Trump announced that Venezuela has agreed to start buying American-made products. And that's not just getting a good deal for American producers, it's making them more dependent on it. For instance, Doc, Venezuelan oil is a kind of a very heavy, thick crude. Sometimes it's almost like a thick goo. So they need a diluent to be able to produce it and then to make it suitable for refining.
Yeah.
Venezuela has often relied on Russia for that diluent. They're going to start getting it from the United States, which again just gives us more leverage over them to take the steps that we want them to take, which is to stop the drug trafficking, kick out all the American adversaries who have bedded down there, and return to the civilized world as a normal, stable, pro-American country.
Exactly. Now, speaking of leverage, early this morning, your colleague, the senior senator from Florida, Rick Scott, was quoted as saying on Fox Business Network this morning, "This is just the beginning of change in Venezuela. Next, we'll address Cuba, fix Nicaragua, and by next year, Colombia will have a new president. Democracy is returning to this hemisphere." Addressing Cuba, that's interesting, because Cuba obviously has been a communist dictatorship now for some 65 years. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Cuba has been exporting communist revolution and violence since Fidel Castro seized power in the 1950s. They were the shock troops for Soviet Russia for much of the Cold War. You maybe saw the news that several dozen Cubans were killed in the operation to apprehend Maduro. Well, why were Cubans killed, Doc, in Venezuela? It's because the Cuban intelligence services were the bodyguards for Maduro.
That's right.
They are much of the power behind the military and the security services and the intelligence agencies in Venezuela. What do they get in return? They've been getting a financial lifeline from Venezuela ever since the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And again, if Cuba doesn't have access to black market oil revenue from Venezuela, their entire government, economy, and society will simply begin to seize up. So Rick Scott is right that we didn't just strike a blow against the communist Maduro regime in Venezuela, but we struck a major blow against the communist Castro regime in Cuba as well. And remember, Cuba still hosts Russia It still hosts China. It allows their military to be present there. It allows their intelligence agency to be present there. Only 90 miles away.
Yeah.
About the same distance from Fort Smith to my hometown of Dardanelle.
Wow. And
that
we
is
are
a grave danger.
We're up against a hard break, and you got to run and we got to run. Tom Cotton, God bless you, sir. We appreciate you coming on. Come back anytime.